Forgive me, I'm not confident that won't fall. Okay, so today I want to speak with you today about invasive species control as a disturbance and how resilient populations can be an obstacle for disturbance. Maybe. Maybe. Okay, okay. Now, perfect. Okay. Disturbances such as wildfires, hurricanes, flooding, and harvest can influence a population's abundance. A population's recovery from disturbance is, okay, let's try that again. Okay, and harvest. The intensity of disturbance can influence the amount of time required for, oh, you guys, I'm sorry. I am not doing great. But a population's resilience is the ability of a population to recover from disturbance. The intensity of disturbance can influence the amount of time required to recover. When we have a highly productive system and a high population productivity, we can have a quicker recovery and a higher resilience for that population. This can be advantageous when you are talking about species conservation. It can be a very valuable characteristic. However, when it is then an invasive species, this is now an obstacle which we need to address with increasing the intensity of management actions. So with the increase in intensity of management actions, we can then see the desired reduction in population, despite that higher productivity. Now, ecosystem size is also an important characteristic to consider, because with a larger ecosystem, the same level of disturbance or management decisions will have less of an impact than it would on a smaller ecosystem. So once again, if we see that scaled response in the disturbance and management decisions, we can then reduce that population successfully, which is important for invasive species. With invasive species removal, it often focuses preliminarily on a single technology. And the success of that single technology can be incredibly limiting. But with that, it is largely dependent on the scale of control implemented and the population's productivity. When that success is not to management standards, we then see the necessity for evaluations of alternative management strategies. And with that, we often see the development of integrated pest management plans highly focused on nuisance insects and noxious plants. However, with fisheries management for invasive species, we see an increase in the development and implementation of integrated pest management plans. My dissertation is examining the broad impacts of ecosystem size and population productivity on the alternative invasive species control strategies. Specifically, I have 4 chapters designed. Today, I will be focusing on the first chapter, but my other chapters include evaluating the use of genetic manipulation as a control strategy, as well as incentivizing commercial harvest efforts of the invasive species, and examining the trade-offs associated with these alternative strategies in terms of both economics and the ecological impact. So for my chapter today, I want to use general models for simulated ecosystems of invasive species populations. where I vary the ecosystem size and also that population productivity. And today I will be focusing on my case study, which is a large open ecosystem, specifically Utah Lake. Utah Lake, as you just heard from Emily, is a large open ecosystem. It has a surface area of 384 kilometers squared. It is a highly degraded system with high levels of nutrient loading and high fluctuations in the lake surface area. With the constant introduction of invasive species, I aim to examine the carp population in Utah Lake. Carp were introduced in 1883 and at the highest estimates accounted for over 90% of the lake's total fish biomass. Common carp are a notorious global invader with ecosystem level impacts, including the uprooting of macrophytes, the suspension of sediments, and the alteration of food webs through competing for food directly. Carp are a highly fecund species, and with compensatory recruitment, they exhibit several additional challenges for control and removal efforts. Specifically on Utah Lake, carp have been a contributing factor to the increase in sediment resuspension and nutrient loading, which has led to a host of problems, including the increase in intensity and frequency of harmful algal blooms. Carp have also been found to have contributed to changes in the trophic food web, including changes in the species composition and abundance of zooplankton and macroinvertebrate species. Their benthic foraging behaviors have also contributed to the decrease of available macrophyte habitat, which is an important rearing habitat for the imperiled Junesucker. Given all of these negative ecosystem impacts, removal began in 2009. With this targeted removal, managers had the goal of a 75% reduction in the carp biomass from the 2009 levels. The commercial seining to date has removed over 15,000 metric tons of common carp from the lake. Given that high amount, the population model suggests that we actually achieved that target biomass in 2017. But with compensatory recruitment and high gear selectivity, this population has been allowed to recover. And simulations suggest that mechanical removal alone is unlikely to maintain this management goal. As such, management agencies have entertained a plethora of other options, including the evaluation of alternative gears, increasing fishing pressure, use of genetic technology, and viral introduction, and what I will be focusing on today, poison bait. Poison has historically been used in fisheries management as a control strategy. General poisons like rotenone we have seen used locally, where there have been highly successful instances in smaller ecosystems. The development of species-specific poisons has been more limiting, but we do have a modest success example in the sea lamprey population of the Great Lakes. However, with that, we see that it is largely tied to the life history because they are targeting this larval phase of their life cycle in predicted tributaries known to cause increases in the population. And with these vested efforts of sea lamprey removal, it has been a long-term process and has constant, continual annual efforts. The challenges for developing a poison bait program is that it's important to note they have not developed this poison bait successfully for Utah Lake. And with that, it is obviously necessary for a program to develop a carp-specific poison bait that is lethal to no other taxa, including the imperiled Junesucker. But with that, prior to development, it is imperative that management entities determine if we can develop this poison bait, if it will have that meaningful impact that we need to see. because why develop a poison bait if it will not have a desired impact on the invasive species population? So assuming that this poison bait can be developed, is it a feasible approach for Utah Lake? Specifically, my research goals for this case study are to use model simulations to determine the potential impact of poison bait application on the carp population in Utah Lake. Or more specifically, how would we expect the carp population to respond to different levels of poison bait application? So beginning with a published carp model published in 2020, I adapted it to consider two different factors, which are lethal dosage potency, which is the percentage of body weight required for a lethal interaction, and the poison bait pool size, which is the volume of poison bait deployed on an annual basis, to then add a category to the model of removal by poison. Now with this, once again, we want to know if this is a feasible approach so that managers can know if they should develop this poison bait. So there are 4 different model assumptions that operate under ideal conditions for maximized impact. The first is that there's a uniform distribution of poison bait and carp throughout the lake. The probability of consumption is based entirely on age composition. All of the bait is being consumed, and individual carp are only consuming that minimum lethal amount. Given these 4 assumptions, if we break any of these assumptions, poison bait will then be a less effective management tool. So if it is not effective in an ideal situation, it's not going to be more effective in a realistic scenario, breaking these assumptions. So a year in poison bait would be, the poison bait would be applied to the population. Individuals will consume that minimum lethal amount. Those individuals are then removed from the population. The population will reproduce and grow, and the following year, the same quantity of poison bait will be applied to that population. I am analyzing several different scenarios of poison bait with ranges in pool sizes from 0 to 50 metric tons of poison bait per year. I am analyzing several different lethal potencies, which range from the 0.5 to the 2.5% of an individual's body weight for that lethal interaction. I also am looking at concurrent removal effort through the current commercial staining effort. However, we are going to be limited on time today, so I will not be talking about that, unfortunately. But all of these scenarios are then simulated for 50 years with 1,000 stochastic iterations. So how would we expect the carp population to respond to different levels of poison bait application in Utah Lake? If we look at some results, it's important to remember that the target goal is a 75% reduction in the carp biomass from those 2009 levels. So on the y-axis, we have the probability of the goal being achieved, which is a proportion of those 1,000 stochastic iterations where that goal is being met or exceeded. So a 75% reduction or greater. And on the x-axis, I have those 50 years simulated. So with no poison bait applied, we see a delay in effect because of current large volumes, but roughly there's a 20% probability of simulations achieving that 75% reduction without the management being added. However, when we add in our different scenarios of poison bait pool sizes, we have the 1 ton effort in that grayish brown color right above the orange. So the 1 ton has almost no impact. We see an increased impact with the 5 ton and the 10 ton, but the largest impact is going to be with these top 3 amounts of poison bait deployed. So we have 15 to 50 metric tons of poison bait deployed annually. If If we look, we do see those delayed impacts. So if we take a cross section looking at year 25, we can then look at the impact of that lethal dosage potency, which we are running out of time. But we have the strongest in the darkest shade up top, and we have the weakest in the lightest shade on the bottom. So if managers were arbitrarily to say they wanted a 60% chance in achieving their management goal, we could then look at the quantity of bait required annually for those 25 years to reach that percentage. Now, given 60% is very low, managers may want something higher, making the weakest bait less and less feasible for this time frame. So how would we expect the carp population to respond to different levels of poison bait application in the lake? The best case scenario, so the absolute optimum case scenario with this simulation operating under ideal conditions for that maximized impact, is going to require a large volume of poison bait application for a long time period. So given that the chapter significance, I hope to inform management decisions on Utah Lake. So given that best case scenario, is it worth developing a poison bait? Luckily, that's a decision to be made by managers. But with my generalized analyses to come, I hope to increase the understanding of ecosystem size and population productivity as a challenge for invasive species management and removal efforts. And I think I'm just about out of time. Okay, we do have time for questions. You had the stop. Okay, but thank you everyone for being here. Yes, Adrian.
You mentioned the example how poison bait is used for lamprey.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you could attempt the history of poison bait, like has it required a lot of trial and error?
I mean,
there have been like a lot of impacts on like other species, like unintended impacts, or like does it require this extreme trial and error before it's even like pulled out?
Yes, with sea lampreys specifically, there has been a large amount of trial and error, and they've successfully, over the course of over 50 years of them trying to control sea lamprey, they have identified tributaries where there are high volumes of sea lamprey produced each year. So they're able to go in and target those areas and poison the larval fish. So they're able to kind of control and predict the amount of reproduction, and that allows them for better control. As far as an actual use of poison bait application, there have been efforts to develop pellets with other countries. There's a lot of work being conducted with New Zealand and Australia. There are some prior papers from France where there have been high mortalities of incidentals in preliminary trials. So having that carp-specific bait is quintessential for this being used as a management tool.
How closely related carp bait to Europe?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
How closely related are carp to the native fish that are inside the lake?
I mean, they are part of Cyprinidae, which is the sucker and minnows. So there is some relation as far as how they would respond to a chemical. I don't know that specifically.
That's time for one more, I think.
Okay. Macy?
I was wondering how you're going to take poison carp. Are you going to be doing that study? Is that the outcome that's
Nope. Nope. Well, prior to COVID, there were talks underway of developing a poison bait through the USGS, but with COVID and then now with the attempts to model, it has kind of been sidelined for the moment. I'm hoping managers will actually use this as a tool to determine if this is a potential option for an additional control strategy. Alone, I think it's pretty obvious the amount of bait required would be very large. Okay,
Thank you.
yes.
Chair,